The darkness of space stretched endlessly around the three damaged alien ships as they limped toward the edge of human territory. Their hulls were scarred with burn marks and torn metal, and strange blue fluid leaked from their engines like blood from a wound. Inside the lead vessel, Ambassador Veltar pressed his four-fingered hand against the viewing port and watched. The stars with eyes that had seen too much death. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defender and studied the incoming ships on his main screen. His brown hair was getting gray at the temples, and his weathered face showed the lines of someone who had seen more battles than he cared to remember. The alien ships were unlike anything in his database, with smooth curves and organic shapes that looked more grown than built. "Sir, we're receiving a distress signal," reported Lieutenant Amy Nash from the communications station. Her voice was calm, but Morrison could hear the tension underneath. "It's coming from the lead ship, but the translation system is having trouble with their language." Morrison nodded and moved closer to the screen. The ships were clearly in bad shape, and whoever was chasing them couldn't be far behind. "Keep working on the translation. And get me a full scan of those vessels. I want to know what we're dealing with." The bridge crew worked quickly and efficiently. These were all veterans who had served with Morrison for years, and they knew their captain's methods. He didn't panic, he didn't rush, but he also didn't waste time when lives were on the line. "Translation coming through now, Captain," Nash announced. "They're asking for sanctuary. They say their homeworld has been invaded and they need protection." Morrison felt his jaw tighten. He had heard similar pleas before, usually from the survivors of worlds that had been conquered by one of the galaxy's many aggressive species. "Put them through." The main screen flickered and showed the interior of the alien ship. The being who appeared was tall and thin, with pale green skin and large, gentle eyes. His species looked fragile, almost delicate, with long limbs and graceful movements that reminded Morrison of dancers. "I am Veltar, ambassador of the Kithara people," the alien said in heavily accented but understandable English. "We seek sanctuary among humans. Our world has fallen to the Skorax Empire, and we are all that remain of our delegation." Morrison had heard of the Skorax. They were known throughout the galaxy as brutal conquerors who showed no mercy to the species they defeated. If they were involved, the situation was about to get much worse. "This is Captain Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet," he replied. "How many ships do you have and how many survivors?" "3 ships, carrying 237 of my people," Veltar answered. "We have medical personnel, scientists, and civilians. We can offer our knowledge in exchange for protection." Morrison studied the alien's face. There was something Veltar wasn't saying, something that made the ambassador's eyes dart nervously away from the screen. "What aren't you telling me, Ambassador?" Veltar was quiet for a long moment, then his shoulders seemed to sag with defeat. "The Skorax fleet is 3 days behind us. They will not stop until we are dead or captured." The bridge fell silent. Morrison felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. This was no longer just a rescue mission. This was about to become a war. "Stand by, Ambassador," Morrison said. "I need to contact my superiors." He turned to his communications officer. "Get me Admiral Sullivan immediately. Priority 1. While they waited for the connection, Morrison walked to the tactical station where Lieutenant Commander Steve Williams was analyzing the alien ships. Williams was young but brilliant, with a gift for understanding alien technology that had saved them more than once. "What do you make of their ships?" Morrison asked. Williams looked up from his console. "They're beautiful, sir. Advanced medical bays, sophisticated life support systems, and some kind of healing technology I've never seen before. But they have almost no weapons. These people are not warriors." Morrison nodded grimly. The Kithara were exactly the kind of peaceful species that the galaxy's predators love to target. They had knowledge and technology but no way to defend themselves. "Sir, Admiral Sullivan is on the line," Nash reported. The main screen changed to show Admiral Kate Sullivan in her command center. She was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of presence that made even veteran officers stand straighter. Morrison had served under her for 10 years, and he knew she was one of the finest military minds in human space. "Report, Captain," Sullivan said without preamble. Morrison quickly explained the situation. Sullivan listened without interruption, her face growing more serious with each detail. "The Skorax," she said when he finished. "They're expanding their territory again? Intelligence reports suggest they've conquered 6 systems in the last year. What are your orders, Admiral?" Morrison asked. Sullivan was quiet for a moment, and Morrison could almost see her weighing the options. Protecting the Cathara refugees meant fighting the Skorax Empire, and that meant risking a war that could spread across the galaxy. "Grant them sanctuary," she said finally. "I'm sending the 5th and 7th battle groups to reinforce you. We'll make our stand there." Morrison felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that they would help the refugees, but apprehension because he knew what it meant. The human fleet would once again be going to war. "Sir, there's something else," Williams said quietly. "I've been monitoring long-range sensors. There's a large fleet moving toward this system. I count at least 200 ships." Sullivan's expression didn't change, but Morrison saw her hands tighten on her chair. "How long until they arrive?" 60 hours, maybe less," Williams replied. "Then we have 60 hours to prepare," Sullivan said. "Captain Morrison, transfer the refugees to the medical ships and prepare for battle. The Skorax are about to learn what happened to the last 2 empires that underestimated humanity." Morrison felt a cold smile cross his face. 5 years ago, the hegemony of Voss had tried to enslave humanity. They learned too late that humans didn't break easily. 3 years ago, the Crimson Syndicate had tried to exploit humanity's emotional bonds by targeting civilians. They discovered that threatening human families was the worst mistake any species could make. Now the Skorax were about to make the same error in judgment. "Understood, Admiral," Morrison said. "We'll be ready." As the connection ended, Morrison turned back to the screen showing Veltar. The alien ambassador was watching him with those large, gentle eyes, and Morrison realized that the Cathara had no idea what they had just unleashed. "Ambassador," Morrison said, "you and your people are now under the protection of the Terran Defense Fleet. We're going to get you to safety." Veltar's relief was visible. "Thank you, Captain. We will not forget this kindness." Morrison nodded, but his mind was already moving to the preparations for battle. The Skorax were coming, and they would find that humanity's Deathworld fleet was ready for them. Commander Lisa Brooks stood in the medical bay of the USS Defender and watched the Cathara refugees with careful eyes. She had seen many alien species during her 20 years of service, but the Cathara were different. They moved with a grace that seemed almost fragile, and their large eyes held an innocence that reminded her of children. It was hard to believe that anyone would want to hurt such peaceful beings. Dr. Alan Carter was working alongside a Cathara healer named Sindel, both of them treating wounded refugees. The alien's healing techniques were unlike anything Carter had seen before. She would place her hands on an injury and somehow accelerate the body's natural healing process. A cut that should have taken weeks to heal was closing in minutes. "This is remarkable," Carter said to Sindel. "How do you do this?" The Cathara healer looked up from her patient. "We have always been able to help others heal. It is our gift to the galaxy. We believe that all life is sacred and should be preserved." Brooks felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She had heard similar words before, from other peaceful species who believed that their goodness would protect them from the galaxy's predators. Most of them were dead now. Ambassador Veltar approached her with slow, careful steps. "Commander Brooks, may I speak with you?" Brooks nodded and followed him to a quieter corner of the medical bay. Up close, she could see the strain in his features. His hands shook slightly and his breathing was too fast. "I must ask you something," Veltar said quietly. "The Skorax fleet that follows us is very large. Are you certain that humans can protect?" "U.S.?" Brooks looked at the alien ambassador for a long moment. She had been asked this question many times before by many different species. The answer was always the same, but it never got easier to give. "Tell me about your homeworld," she said. Instead, what happened there? Veltar's large eyes filled with what Brooks recognized as tears. The Skorax came without warning. We tried to negotiate, to offer them our medical knowledge in exchange for peace. They laughed at us. They said we were weak, and that weakness deserved only slavery or death. Brooks felt anger building in her chest. It was an old anger, one that had been growing for years as she watched peaceful species fall to galactic bullies. "How long did your world hold out?" she asked. 6 hours, Veltar whispered. Our cities had no defenses. Our people had no weapons. We had lived in peace for 3,000 years. Brooks nodded slowly. 5 years ago, the hegemony of Voss tried to conquer humanity. They had a fleet of over 1,000 ships and technology that was centuries ahead of ours. They thought we would surrender after the first battle. She moved to the medical bay's viewing port and looked out at the stars. The hegemony had studied humans for months before they attacked. They knew we were a young species with primitive weapons and no experience with galactic warfare. They thought we would be easy prey. Veltar moved beside her, his curiosity overcoming his fear. What happened? They attacked our colony world of New Boston first, Brooks continued. It was a farming world with only a few thousand people. The hegemony expected them to surrender immediately when they saw the size of the invasion fleet. Brooks paused, remembering the reports she had read. Instead, the colonists fought back with hunting rifles and farming equipment. They held out for 3 days against impossible odds. Every man, woman, and teenager who could hold a weapon joined the fight. But surely they were defeated, Veltar said quietly. They were, Brooks agreed. But those 3 days gave the Terran Defense Fleet time to mobilize. More importantly, they showed the hegemony something they didn't expect. Humans don't surrender. We don't break. We fight until we win or until we die. She turned to face the ambassador. The war lasted 8 months. The hegemony had better weapons, better shields, and more ships. But they made a fatal mistake. They tried to fight a human war. Brooks began walking slowly around the medical bay, her voice taking on the tone of someone telling a story she had lived through. You see, most galactic species fight wars like a game of chess. Everything is planned, orderly, predictable. They have rules about what targets are acceptable and what weapons can be used. The hegemony expected us to follow the same rules. She stopped in front of a group of young Kithara who were listening with wide eyes. Humans don't play by those rules. We use whatever works. We attack from directions that should be impossible. We turn our own ships into weapons if we have to. Admiral Sullivan was just a captain then, Brooks continued. She led a group of damaged human ships straight into the heart of the hegemony's main fleet. Her ship was falling apart, her crew was wounded, but she never even considered retreat. Veltar was staring at her with fascination and growing concern. What did she do? She rammed her ship into the hegemony's flagship at full speed, Brooks said simply. The explosion took out 12 enemy vessels and created a gap in their formation. The rest of the human fleet poured through that gap like water through a broken dam. Dr. Carter had stopped his work to listen. He had heard this story before, but it never failed to amaze him how casually Brooks could describe actions that had saved billions of lives. The hegemony's crystal cities were beautiful, Brooks continued, towers of pure light that had stood for 10,000 years. The hegemony leaders thought their cities were untouchable because they were so far behind the front lines. She smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. They learned that humans don't recognize the concept of untouchable. If you threaten our people, nowhere in the galaxy is safe. We tracked down every hegemony leader and destroyed every one of their cities. Veltar was backing away from her slightly. You destroyed entire cities? We ended a war that could have lasted decades, Brooks replied. The hegemony of Voss no longer exists. Their survivors live peacefully in human space under our protection. She moved to another viewing port and gazed out at the approaching human fleet. 3 years ago, the Crimson Syndicate made an even bigger mistake. They thought they could break us by targeting our families. Her voice became colder. The Syndicate had studied the hegemony's defeat, and they decided that humans were too emotional. They thought our love for our families was a weakness they could exploit. Brooks turned. Back to Veltar, they attacked civilian targets, schools, hospitals, family gatherings. They wanted to make us suffer so much that we would surrender to save our loved ones. They were wrong, Carter said quietly from his workstation. They were very wrong, Brooks agreed. The Syndicate learned that threatening human families doesn't make us surrender, it makes us angry. And angry humans are the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. She walked back to Veltar, who was now looking at her with something approaching fear. The Syndicate's ruling council was eliminated in a single night. 17 star systems hit simultaneously. Every leader, every general, every official who had approved the attacks on civilians. We didn't destroy their cities, Brooks continued. We didn't need to. We just removed everyone who had made the decision to hurt innocent people. The war ended the next day. Veltar was quiet for a long moment. You are not what I expected when I asked for human protection. Brooks smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. We're not monsters, Ambassador. We're protectors. But we're very good at it. She gestured toward the viewing ports where the human fleet was visible in the distance. That fleet out there has ended 2 galactic empires. Not because we wanted to, but because they forced us to. The Skorax are about to make the same mistake. Will you really fight such a large fleet to protect us? Veltar asked. Brooks looked at the Cathara refugees around them, at their gentle faces and innocent eyes. Ambassador, your people are now under human protection. The Skorax can bring 1,000 ships if they want. It won't matter. She moved toward the exit, then paused. You should know something else. Every species that has ever been protected by humans is still alive and free. We've never lost anyone we've promised to protect. As she left the medical bay, Brooks could hear the Cathara talking quietly among themselves in their musical language. She knew they were probably frightened by what they had learned about their protectors. That was normal. Most peaceful species were scared when they first learned what humans were capable of, but they would learn, as all the others had, that human warriors were the most reliable friends any species could have. The Skorax fleet was coming, and they would discover what the hegemony and the Syndicate had learned too late. Humans were not the prey they appeared to be. The Skorax fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a dark cloud covering the stars. General Thrakmer stood on the bridge of his flagship and counted the enemy vessels with satisfaction. 47 human ships against his 200 warships. The odds were so overwhelming that this would barely qualify as a battle. Thrakmer was a massive creature, even by Skorax standards. His thick gray skin was covered in the ritual scars that marked him as a veteran of dozens of campaigns. His forearms ended in claws that could tear through metal, and his eyes glowed with the red light that came from a lifetime of violence. He had conquered 17 different species, and humans would be the 18th. General, the human fleet is moving into defensive formation, reported his tactical officer. They appear to be protecting the refugee ships. Thrakmer laughed, a sound like grinding stone. 47 ships. These humans must be insane to think they can fight us with such numbers. His intelligence officer, a smaller Skorax named Kethra, approached cautiously. Sir, I should mention that these are the same humans who defeated the hegemony of Voss and the Crimson Syndicate. Thrakmer's laughter stopped abruptly. Impossible. The hegemony had 1,000 ships. The Syndicate controlled 50 systems. Humans are a young species with primitive technology. Nevertheless, General, both empires no longer exist, Kethra said quietly. Perhaps we should proceed with caution. Thrakmer backhanded the smaller Skorax across the bridge. Coward. The hegemony and Syndicate were weak. They lost because they were not true warriors. We are Skorax. We have never been defeated in battle. On the USS Defender, Captain Morrison watched the Skorax fleet with grim satisfaction. They were arranging themselves in a classic attack formation, exactly as his intelligence reports had predicted. The Skorax were powerful warriors, but they were also predictable. They relied on overwhelming force and straightforward tactics. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Skorax flagship," reported Lieutenant Nash. Morrison nodded. "Put it through." The main screen filled with Thrakmer's massive form. The Skorax general's red eyes seemed to burn as he spoke. "I am General Thrakmer of the Skorax Empire. You will immediately surrender the Kithara refugees to us. They are criminals who have fled from Imperial justice." Morrison looked at the alien general with calm eyes. "I'm Captain Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. The Kithara are under our protection. You have no authority in human space." Thrakmer's forearms flexed with anger. "Human space? You control a handful of primitive worlds. The Skorax Empire spans 300 systems. You will surrender the refugees or face the consequences." "The consequences?" Morrison asked. "And what would those be?" "Total destruction," Thrakmer replied. "I have 200 warships. You have fewer than 50. This is not a battle you can win." Morrison was quiet for a moment, studying the Skorax. General. He had seen this kind of arrogance before in the leaders of the hegemony and the syndicate. They always made the same mistake. They thought that numbers were all that mattered in war. "General Thrakmer," Morrison said finally, "let me make something clear. The Kithara refugees are now citizens of the Terran Federation. They are under our protection. If you want them, you'll have to go through us." Thrakmer's eyes blazed brighter. "You would sacrifice your entire fleet for a handful of alien refugees. This proves that humans are weak and emotional." "No," Morrison replied. "This proves that humans keep their promises." The connection ended, and Morrison turned to his crew. Every face on the bridge was calm and determined. These were veterans who had served with him through previous battles. They knew what was coming. "Sir, Admiral Sullivan is requesting a secure channel," Nash reported. Morrison nodded and moved to his command chair. A moment later, Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on a private screen. "Status report, Captain," Sullivan said. 200 Skorax warships as predicted," Morrison replied. "General Thrakmer has demanded we surrender the refugees. I've refused." Sullivan's expression didn't change. "Good. The 5th and 7th battle groups are still 6 hours away. Can you hold that long?" Morrison looked at the tactical display, showing the overwhelming enemy numbers. "We'll hold, Admiral." "How long do you need?" "Give me 4 hours," Sullivan said. "I have a plan, but I need time to coordinate with the other fleet commanders." The connection ended, and Morrison returned to the main screen. The Skorax fleet was moving into attack position, their massive ships forming a wall of metal and weapons. Each Skorax vessel was twice the size of a human ship, with heavy armor and powerful shields. Lieutenant Commander Williams was studying the enemy formation from his tactical station. "Sir, I've been analyzing their ship designs. Their shields are impressive, but they're powered by a centralized system. If we could overload their main grid—" "Keep working on it," Morrison ordered. "We need every advantage we can get." In the medical bay, Ambassador Veltar was watching the preparations with growing terror. The Kithara refugees huddled together as they listened to the announcements over the ship's communication system. They could hear the human crew making ready for battle, and they knew that people were about to die because of them. "Commander Brooks," Veltar said when she entered the medical bay, "perhaps we should surrender ourselves. We cannot ask you to die for us." Brooks looked at the ambassador with surprise. "Ambassador, do you know what the Skorax do to refugees they capture?" Veltar's large eyes filled with tears. "They make examples of them. Public executions to discourage other species from fleeing. Then you know why we can't let them have you." Brooks replied, "Besides, humans don't surrender. It's not in our nature." Dr. Carter was checking his medical supplies and preparing for casualties. "Ambassador, you should know that every human on this ship volunteered for this mission. We knew the risks when we agreed to protect your people." Veltar shook his head. "But the odds are so against you. 200 ships against 47. How can you hope to win?" Brooks smiled. "Ambassador, let me tell you something about humans. We don't fight to win. We fight to protect what matters." "There's a difference." "On the Skorax flagship, Thrakmer," was growing impatient. The human fleet had not moved from their defensive position, and no surrender message had been received. He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the human fleet," he ordered. When the connection was established, Thrakmer's voice boomed across space. "Humans, you have had time to consider your situation. I will give you one final chance. Surrender the refugees now, or I will destroy every ship in your fleet." Morrison's response came back immediately. "General, the Kithara under Terran. Protection. If you want them, come and take them." Thrakmer's roar of anger echoed across his bridge. "Fools, begin the attack. Show these humans what happens when they defy the Skorax Empire." The Skorax fleet began moving forward, their weapons charging and their shields at full power. 200 warships against 47. The outcome seemed inevitable, but on the bridge of the USS Defender, Captain Morrison was smiling. He had received a coded message from Admiral Sullivan, and he knew something that General Thrakmer didn't. The Skorax were about to learn the same lesson that the Hegemony and Syndicate had learned: numbers didn't win wars. Determination did. "All ships, this is Morrison," he announced over the fleet communication system. "Remember what we're fighting for. Those refugees are counting on us. Let's show the Skorax what happens when they threaten people under human protection." The human fleet moved into combat formation, their smaller ships darting between the massive Skorax vessels like wolves, attacking a herd of buffalo. The battle was about to begin, and both sides knew that only one fleet would survive. Thrakmer watched the human ships with contempt. "Look at them. They think their small ships can defeat our mighty fleet. They will learn the price of defying the Skorax Empire." But as the first shots were fired, something nagged at the back of his mind. The humans were not retreating. They were not begging for mercy. They were advancing toward his fleet with the same determination that had destroyed 2 galactic empires. For the first time in his long career, General Thrakmer felt the cold touch of doubt. The first salvo from the Skorax fleet lit up space like a deadly fireworks display. Massive energy beams lanced across the darkness, each one powerful enough to destroy a city. The Skorax had opened with their heaviest weapons, expecting to cripple the human fleet in the opening moments of battle. Captain Morrison watched the incoming fire with calm eyes. All ships, evasive maneuvers, pattern Delta 7. The human fleet scattered like leaves in a storm. Their ships were smaller and faster than the Skorax vessels, and they used that advantage to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. But even so, 2 human ships took direct hits. The USS Boston exploded in a ball of flame, while the USS Phoenix limped away with half its hull torn open. 17 crew lost on the Boston, 32 wounded on the Phoenix, reported Lieutenant Nash, her voice steady despite the tragedy. Morrison felt the familiar weight of command settle heavier on his shoulders. Those were good people, friends he had served with for years. But this was war, and in war, good people died. The only thing he could do was make sure their sacrifice counted. "All ships, begin attack run Alpha," Morrison ordered. "Target there." Lead vessels. The human fleet regrouped and charged directly at the Skorax formation. It looked like suicide to the alien observers, 47 small ships racing toward 200 massive warships. But the humans had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous move was the one nobody expected. General Thrakmer watched the human charge with growing confusion. "What are they doing? This is madness. They cannot hope to break through our lines." His tactical officer was equally puzzled. "Perhaps they are trying to ram us, General. Some species resort to suicide attacks when they are desperate, but as the human ships reached the Skorax formation, they did something unexpected. Instead of ramming or firing their weapons, they suddenly scattered in all directions. Each human ship picked a different target and began weaving between the massive Skorax vessels like fighters dancing around giants. Captain Amy Rodriguez of the USS Vengeance was leading one of the attack groups. She had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of all, to penetrate deep into the enemy formation and strike at their command ship. Her ship was already damaged from the opening salvo, but her crew was still fighting. "Engineering, how long until the reactor overloads?" she asked over the intercom. 15 minutes, Captain, came the reply. Maybe 20 if we're lucky, Rodriguez smiled grimly. 20 minutes was more than enough time. She had studied the Skorax formation and identified their weakness. Their ships were powerful but slow, and they relied on staying in formation to protect each other. If she could break their formation, the rest of the human fleet could exploit. The confusion. All crew, this is the captain, she announced. Abandon ship, get to the escape pods now. Her bridge crew looked at her with shock. Captain, what about you? Asked her first officer. Someone has to stay and steer this thing, Rodriguez replied. Get going. That's an order. As her crew reluctantly headed for the escape pods, Rodriguez aimed her dying ship straight at the center of the Skorax formation. The USS Vengeance was falling apart around her, but its engines still worked. And that was all she needed. On the Skorax flagship, Thrakmer watched the approaching human ship with growing alarm. Destroy that vessel immediately! Dozens of weapons fired at the USS Vengeance, but Rodriguez was ready for them. She used the massive Skorax ships as cover, weaving between them so the aliens couldn't get a clear shot without risking hitting their own vessels. Her ship took hit after hit, but she kept flying. General, that ship's reactor is about to explode, warned the tactical officer. If it detonates in the middle of our formation... Thrakmer's eyes widened with understanding. The human wasn't trying to ram them. She was turning her ship into a bomb. The USS Vengeance finally lost power just as it reached the center of the Skorax formation. Rodriguez had 30 seconds before the reactor went critical. She used those seconds to send one final message to the human fleet. This is Rodriguez. Tell my family I love them. Give them hell, people. The explosion was visible from 3-star systems away. The USS Vengeance's reactor didn't just explode, it went supernova. The blast took out 12 Skorax ships instantly, and sent shockwaves through 24 others. More importantly, it created a massive gap in the alien formation. All ships through the gap, Morrison ordered. Make Rodriguez's sacrifice count. The human fleet poured through the opening like water through a broken dam. Now they were inside the Skorax formation, and the aliens' numerical advantage became a disadvantage. The massive Skorax ships couldn't fire without risking hitting their own vessels, while the smaller human ships could dart between them at will. Commander Lisa Brooks was leading a boarding party onto a Skorax. CRU Ice Air. Her team had used magnetic clamps to attach their assault shuttle to the alien ship's hull, and now they were cutting through the armor with plasma torches. A breach in 30 seconds, reported Sergeant Tom Davis. The team's demolitions expert, Brooks checked her weapon one more time. She had done this before during the wars with the Hegemony and the Syndicate. Boarding enemy ships was one of the most dangerous missions in space combat, but it was also one of the most effective. Most alien species weren't prepared to fight. Humans in close quarters, the plasma torch finished its work and the section of hull fell inward with a crash. Brooks and her team poured through the opening into the Skorax ship. The interior was built for creatures much larger than humans. The corridors were wide and tall, designed for beings who stood 3 meters high and had 4 arms. But that just gave the humans more room to maneuver. The first group of Skorax defenders appeared around a corner, their massive forms filling the corridor. They were wearing battle armor and carrying weapons that looked like they could punch through a tank. But they made the same mistake that most aliens made when fighting humans. They expected a fair fight. Brooks and her team didn't fight fair. They used grenades to blind the aliens, then attacked from multiple directions at once. The Skorax were powerful warriors, but they were used to fighting other large, slow species. They weren't prepared for humans who could move like ghosts and strike like lightning. Corridor secure, Brooks reported over her radio. Moving to the engine room. Similar scenes were playing out all across the battlefield. Human boarding parties were striking at critical systems while their ships continued to dart between the Skorax vessels. The aliens were powerful, but they were fighting a type of warfare they had never encountered before. Admiral Sullivan arrived with the reinforcement fleet just as the battle reached its peak. She surveyed the chaos with satisfaction. The Skorax formation was completely broken, their ships scattered and confused. Morrison had done exactly what she had hoped he would do. "All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan," she announced over the fleet. "Communications. Begin Operation Sledgehammer." The reinforcement fleet spread out and began attacking the scattered Skorax ships from all directions. Now the aliens faced attacks from every angle, with no formation to protect them and no clear chain of command. General Thrakmer watched his mighty fleet falling apart with growing horror. This wasn't how wars were supposed to be fought. The humans didn't follow any of the accepted rules of galactic warfare. They turned their ships into weapons, they boarded enemy vessels like pirates, and they showed no fear even when facing impossible odds. "General, we've lost 40 ships," reported his tactical officer. "The humans are inside our formation and we can't coordinate our defenses," Thrakmer roared with fury. "How is this possible? We outnumber them 4-1. But even as he spoke, he could see more human ships breaking through his scattered fleet. They moved with a coordination that seemed impossible, as if they could read each other's minds. Every attack was perfectly timed, every maneuver designed to cause maximum damage. On the USS Defender, Captain Morrison was coordinating the battle, with the skill of someone who had fought in dozens of similar engagements. The Skorax were learning what the Hegemony and Syndicate had learned before them. Humans didn't just fight to win. They fought with a determination that bordered on madness. "Sir, the Skorax are trying to regroup around their flagship," reported Williams from the tactical station. Morrison studied the display. "Not if I can help it. All ships, target their command vessel. Let's end this." The human fleet converged on the Skorax flagship like a pack of wolves surrounding a wounded elk. Thrakmer's ship was massive and powerful, but it was also outnumbered and outmaneuvered. In the medical bay of the USS Defender, Ambassador Veltar watched the battle with amazement and terror. The humans fought with a ferocity that defied understanding. They seemed to feel no fear, only determination to protect those under their care. "How do they do it?" he asked Dr. Carter. "How do they fight so bravely when the odds are against them?" Carter looked up from treating a wounded human soldier. "Because we're not fighting for ourselves, Ambassador. We're fighting for you." The battle raged on, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Skorax had expected an easy victory against a small human fleet. Instead, they had encountered something they had never faced before. They had met humanity's Deathworld fleet, and they were learning why 2 galactic empires had already fallen before it. The battle had been raging for 3 hours when everything changed. Captain Morrison felt the USS Defender shudder under a direct hit from a Skorax heavy cruiser. Sparks flew from control panels, and the lights flickered as power systems struggled to compensate for the damage. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported Lieutenant Nash, her voice tight with stress. "Emergency teams are responding." Morrison gripped his command chair as another impact shook the ship. Through the viewing ports, he could see the wreckage of both human and Skorax vessels drifting in space. The battle had taken a terrible toll on both sides. The Skorax fleet was down to barely 100 ships, but the human losses were also severe. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the fleet," Williams said from his tactical station. "The USS Liberty is dead in space, the USS Freedom has lost main power, and the USS Justice is reporting critical damage to their life support systems." Morrison felt the weight of every lost ship, every casualty report. These weren't just numbers on a tactical display. They were people he had served with, friends who had trusted him to lead them into battle. But he couldn't afford to dwell on the losses. "Not yet. What's our status?" he asked. "Main engines at 60%, weapon systems operational, but our shields are down to 20% capacity," Williams replied. "We can't take many more hits like that last one." On the Skorax flagship, General Thrakmer was facing his own crisis. His mighty fleet had been reduced to half its original strength, and his own ship was showing signs of serious damage. Sparks flew from damaged systems, and several of his crew lay dead at their stations. "General, perhaps we should consider withdrawal," suggested his tactical officer. We have underestimated these humans. Thrakmar's roar of rage echoed across the bridge. Skorax, do not retreat. We are warriors. We will destroy these humans even if it costs us every ship. But even as he spoke, Thrakmar knew something had gone terribly wrong. His intelligence reports had described humans as a young species with primitive technology. They were supposed to be easy prey, like all the other peaceful species the Skorax had conquered. Instead, they fought with a determination that defied all logic. "Sir, incoming message from the surface fleet," reported his communications officer. Thrakmar activated the communication system. The face that appeared belonged to Admiral Kreshtar, commander of the Skorax ground invasion force that was still conquering Kithara worlds. "General, I need immediate reinforcement," Kreshtar said urgently. "The humans have somehow penetrated our defensive lines and are attacking our supply depots." Thrakmar felt ice form in his stomach. "That's impossible. The human fleet is here, fighting us." "I don't care where their main fleet is," Kreshtar replied. "I'm watching human ships destroy our ammunition stockpiles right now. Without those supplies, my entire invasion force will be stranded." The communication ended, leaving Thrakmar staring at a blank screen. How could the humans be in two places at once? His fleet was keeping their entire military force busy. There shouldn't be any human ships available for other missions. In the medical bay of the USS Defender, the situation was becoming desperate. Dr. Carter and the Kithara healer Sindel were working frantically to save the wounded. The medical bay was filled with injured crew members, and more were arriving every few minutes. Captain Morrison himself had been brought in 20 minutes earlier with severe burns on his left arm and a head wound that left him dizzy and disoriented. But he had refused to stay for treatment, insisting that he needed to return to the bridge. "Captain, you have a serious concussion," Carter argued. "You shouldn't be making command decisions in your condition." Morrison pushed himself up from the medical table despite Carter's protests. "Doctor, my crew is dying out there. I'm not going to lie here while they fight for their lives." Sindel approached with her gentle, healing touch. "Please, Captain Morrison, let me help you. Your people need you healthy." Morrison looked at the Kithara healer with tired eyes. "Can you fix this quickly? I need to get back to the bridge." Sindel placed her hands on Morrison's head wound. The warm, tingling sensation of accelerated healing spread through his skull, and the pain began to fade. Within minutes, the wound had closed and his vision cleared. "Thank you," Morrison said simply. "Your people's gift is remarkable." As he headed back to the bridge, Morrison passed Ambassador Veltar in the corridor. The Kithara diplomat was helping to carry wounded crew members to the medical bay, his large eyes filled with tears. "Captain," Veltar said quietly, "this is too much. Too many of your people are dying because of us. Perhaps we should surrender ourselves to end this fighting." Morrison stopped and looked at the ambassador. "Veltar, do you know what the Skorax will do if we surrender you?" "They will execute us publicly," Veltar replied. "But at least your people will live?" Morrison shook his head. "No, that's not how this works. When humans give their word, we keep it. You're under our protection, and that protection doesn't end just because the fighting gets hard." He continued toward the bridge, leaving Veltar to stare after him with a mixture of admiration and incomprehension. On the bridge, Morrison found his crew working with the calm efficiency of seasoned veterans, despite the chaos of battle around them. His people continued to perform their duties with the precision that had made the human fleet legendary. "Sir, Admiral Sullivan is requesting an emergency conference," Nash reported. Morrison activated the secure communication system. Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on the screen, and he could see the strain of battle in her expression. "Status report, Captain," Sullivan said without preamble. "We're holding, but barely," Morrison replied honestly. "We've lost 12 ships, and most of the survivors are showing heavy damage. The Skorax are down to about 100 vessels, but they're still fighting hard." Sullivan nodded grimly. "The situation has changed, Jake. Intelligence reports that the Skorax have planet-killer weapons in their fleet. If they can't win conventionally, they might use them." Morrison felt his blood turn cold. Planet killers were weapons banned by Every civilized species in the galaxy. They could destroy entire worlds, turning planets into lifeless rocks floating in space. Admiral, there are no inhabited planets in this system, Morrison pointed out. There will be if they retreat to the nearest colony world, Sullivan replied. We can't let them escape with those weapons. This ends here, one way or another. Morrison understood the implications. They couldn't allow the Skorax to retreat and use planet killers against innocent civilians. The human fleet would have to destroy every enemy ship, no matter the cost. What do you need from me? Morrison asked. Sullivan's expression was grim. Intelligence has located a Skorax supply depot in the next system. It's heavily defended, but if we can destroy it, their entire invasion fleet will be cut off from reinforcements and ammunition. Morrison studied the tactical information Sullivan transmitted. The supply depot was protected by 50 Skorax ships and a network of defensive stations. It would be a suicide mission for any force small enough to get past the defenses. I'll take a strike team, Morrison said immediately. No, Sullivan replied firmly. I need you here to coordinate the main battle. I'm sending Commander Brooks with the 7th Battle Group. It's a small enough force to avoid detection, but large enough to do the job. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. Brooks was one of his oldest friends, and he knew she was being sent on a mission she probably wouldn't survive. But he also knew she was the best choice for the job. Understood, Admiral, Morrison said quietly. As the communication ended, Morrison realized that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of the Cathara refugees, but possibly the future of human space. If the Skorax escaped with their planet-killer weapons, they could hold entire worlds hostage. The battle was entering its final phase, and both sides knew that only one fleet would survive to see the dawn. Commander Lisa Brooks stood on the bridge of the USS Warrior and watched the Skorax supply depot grow larger on the main screen. 50 enemy ships surrounded the massive station, their weapons trained outward in a defensive formation that looked impossible to break. Behind her, the other ships of the 7th Battle Group waited for her orders. Commander, we're detecting heavy fortifications, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Miles from the tactical station. Energy shields, automated defense platforms, and enough firepower to stop a full fleet. Brooks studied the enemy positions with the eye of someone who had fought in dozens of similar battles. The depot was built like a fortress, designed to withstand any attack. But fortresses always had weaknesses, and Brooks had made a career out of finding them. What about the asteroid field on the far side? She asked. Miles checked her sensors. Lots of interference from the metal deposits. Their sensors won't be able to track us effectively in there, Brooks smiled grimly. Then that's our way in? All ships, follow me into the asteroid field. We're going to hit them where they don't expect it. The small human fleet disappeared into the swirling mass of rock and metal. The asteroids provided perfect cover, but they also made navigation deadly. One wrong move could send a ship crashing into a mountain-sized rock. But the human pilots were the best in the galaxy, trained on the dangerous asteroid fields around. Earth, meanwhile, the main battle continued to rage around the Cathara refugee ships. Admiral Sullivan watched the tactical display with growing concern. Her fleet had managed to reduce the Skorax numbers to 80 ships, but her own losses were mounting. Every minute that passed meant more good people dying. Captain Morrison's USS Defender was still fighting despite heavy damage. Half his crew was wounded, his shields were completely gone, and his main weapons were operating at reduced power. But Morrison refused to withdraw from the battle line. Sir, incoming transmission from the Skorax flagship, Nash reported, her voice hoarse from hours of battle. Morrison nodded wearily. Put them through. General Thrakmer's massive form appeared on the screen. The Skorax commander looked different. Now, his armor was cracked, his red eyes showed exhaustion, and there was something in his expression that Morrison had never seen before in a Skorax warrior. Fear. Human captain, Thrakmer said slowly, I offer you terms. Withdraw your fleet, now, and I will spare your colonies. Morrison studied the alien general with interest. After hours of brutal fighting, the Skorax were finally ready to negotiate. but Morrison knew it was too late for that. "What terms?" Morrison asked. "Give us the Cathara refugees and we will leave your space," Thrakmer replied. "Continue to fight, and we will use our planet-killer weapons against your worlds." Morrison felt anger rise in his chest. "You would threaten innocent civilians to get what you want." "I will do whatever is necessary to complete my mission," Thrakmer replied. "The choice is yours, human." Morrison was quiet for a moment, thinking about the billions of people living on human colony worlds. Then he thought about the Cathara refugees in his medical bay, gentle beings who had never hurt anyone. Finally, he thought about Captain Rodriguez and all the other brave souls who had died to protect those refugees. "General Thrakmer," Morrison said quietly, "here's my answer. Go to hell." The communication ended, and Morrison turned to his crew. Every face on the bridge showed the same determination that had carried humanity through 2 previous wars against galactic empires. "All ships, this is Morrison," he announced over the fleet communication system. "The Skorax have threatened to use planet-killer weapons against our colonies. We cannot allow them to escape with those weapons. This is our last stand." In the asteroid field, Brooks and her strike team were moving into position for their attack on the supply depot. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would emerge from the asteroids at maximum speed, strike the depot's reactor core, and escape before the Skorax defenders could respond. "All ships begin attack run," Brooks ordered. The human ships burst out of the asteroid field like bullets from a gun. The Skorax defenders were caught completely off guard. Their sensors had been useless in the metal-rich asteroid field, and they had no warning of the approaching attack. Brooks led her ship straight toward the depot's central reactor. Her weapons officer, Lieutenant Jack Parker, had calculated the exact point where their missiles would cause maximum damage. "Firing all weapons," Parker announced. The USS Warrior's missiles streaked toward the depot just as the Skorax defenders began to respond. Energy beams lanced out from the enemy ships, and Brooks felt her vessel shudder under multiple impacts. "Direct hit on the reactor core," Miles reported. "The depot is going critical." But their success came at a terrible price. The Skorax defenders had focused all their fire on Brooks' ship. The USS Warrior was falling apart around them, its hull torn open and its engines failing. "All crew, abandon ship," Brooks ordered. "Get to the escape pods." Her crew began evacuating, but Brooks remained at her station. Someone had to keep the ship steady long enough for the others to escape. She watched the escape pods launch one by one, carrying her people to safety. "Commander, that's the last pod," Miles reported from beside her. "We need to go." Brooks looked at her loyal officer. "Sarah, get out of here. That's an order." "I'm not leaving you, Commander," Miles replied firmly. Before Brooks could argue, the depot exploded. The blast was so powerful that it lit up 3 star systems. The explosion destroyed the depot, 50 Skorax ships, and the USS Warrior. But it also cut off the entire Skorax invasion fleet from their supplies and reinforcements. In the main battle, General Thrakmer watched the distant explosion with growing horror. Without the supply depot, his fleet was stranded in enemy territory, with no way to get more ammunition or replacement parts. "General, we're receiving reports from across the fleet," his tactical officer said quietly. "Our ammunition supplies are running low. Without the depot, we cannot continue fighting much longer." Thrakmer's forearms clenched with rage and desperation. His mighty fleet was being defeated by a smaller human force, and now his supply lines had been cut. For the first time in his career, he faced the possibility of total defeat. "Sir, several of our ship commanders are requesting permission to withdraw," the tactical officer continued. Thrakmer turned to face his bridge crew. He could see doubt in their eyes, the same doubt that was growing in his own mind. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. Captain Morrison received the news of Brooks' sacrifice with a heavy heart. She had been one of his oldest friends, a warrior who had fought beside him in 2 previous wars. But her mission had succeeded. The Skorax were now cut off and running low on supplies. "Sir, the enemy fleet is breaking formation," Williams reported. "Several Skorax ships are trying to retreat." Morrison felt grim satisfaction. The Skorax were finally learning what the Hegemony and Syndicate had learned before them. When humans gave their word, they kept it, no matter the cost. All ships, pursue and destroy, Morrison ordered. Don't let any of them escape with those planet-killer weapons. The final phase of the battle was swift and decisive. Cut off from supplies and facing human determination that bordered on fanatical, the Skorax fleet began to collapse. Ship after ship was destroyed or surrendered as their crews realized the futility of continued resistance. General Thrakmer's own officers finally turned against him when he ordered them to activate the planet-killer weapons. They had seen what happened to the last two empires that had challenged humanity, and they refused to follow their general into extinction. The war ended not with a grand explosion, but with Thrakmer's own crew placing him in chains and surrendering to Admiral Sullivan. In the aftermath, the surviving Skorax were treated with the same dignity that humans showed to all prisoners of war. The Cathara refugees were granted full citizenship in human space, and their medical knowledge led to advances that benefited both species. Ambassador Veltar stood in the observation deck of the USS Defender and watched the recovery operations. Human ships were rescuing survivors from both sides, treating Skorax prisoners with the same care they gave their own wounded. "I do not understand you," Veltar said to Captain Morrison, who had come to check on the refugees. "You fight with such fury, but you show mercy to your enemies." Morrison looked out at the rescue operations. "We fight to protect what matters, Ambassador. Once the fighting is over, everyone deserves a chance to live in peace." Dr. Carter approached them with a report in his hands. "Captain, I thought you should know. The joint medical program with the Cathara is already showing remarkable results. Their healing techniques combined with our medical knowledge could revolutionize treatment for both species." Morrison nodded. "That's good news, Doctor. Something positive coming out of all this tragedy." Veltar placed a gentle hand on Morrison's shoulder. "Captain, why did your people sacrifice so much for us? We are strangers to you." Morrison thought about Captain Rodriguez, Commander Brooks, and all the others who had given their lives to protect the Cathara refugees. "Because that's what humans do, Ambassador. We protect those who cannot protect themselves."